we're really excited to be introducing Dr. Gretchen Starr-LeBeau to our class on the Inquisition in Spain and Spanish America today. I have known Gretchen for several years, and I feel like every time I have a conversation with her, I learn more about our time period and our shared work of history. Dr. Starr-LeBeau is the Jeanne and George Todd Professor of Religious Studies and the chair of the History Department at Principia College. She earned her PhD in history at the University of Michigan. Dr. Starr-LeBeau is an expert in the Spanish Inquisition, as you know from your textbook and also the case you read for today. And she is especially interested in Conversos, which she will focus on in the talk. She is also, as you know, a remarkable storyteller. She is the rare historian who can offer both a gripping narrative and sweeping analytic revisions about a topic that other historians have struggled with for years. The story of Mari Sanchez, which you read about today, is one that I read long before I met Dr. Starr-LeBeau. I was struck then, as I am now, by the way she created indelible characters with so little material and so little embellishment. The dilemmas of Mari Sanchez and Inés in Dr. Starr-LeBeau's hands feel both undeniably specific to their moment and painfully quite universal. So now I will turn it over to Dr. Starr-LeBeau, and I want to just note that I can see the image flickering a little behind us as the connection is not great. So if you see me sort of fiddling, that's what I'm doing, Gretchen. It's nothing to do with you. I'm just trying to fix the HDMI connector. All right, thanks.
That is A-okay. And I'm just personally glad we don't have to be on Zoom every day like we were a few years ago.
Yes.
And I will go ahead and share my screen. Oh, can you allow me to share my screen?
Sure. There we are. Is that allowing you?
Let's see. Yay, thank you.
Great.
And I'll just thank you so much for that introduction. That is really incredibly generous of you from someone who's a really outstanding historian and storyteller herself. I'm really honored, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm honestly just super excited to be here and to talk about Conversos and talk about Mari Sanchez and Inés Gonzalez with you guys. I've been thinking about them literally for decades, so this is a lot of fun for me. What I thought we would do to start off with is take about the first half of the class to touch on a few topics. I want to talk, since this is a course that involves the diversity core requirement for you all of engaging with difference and justice, I want to talk a little bit specifically about difference in the context of the past. And then we'll talk about conversos a bit. And in the process, I wanted to explain a little bit how I learn about the people that I write about, and which is just in general how historians do history, and how historians research and think about conversos in particular. Then I'll open it up for questions. We can talk about Mari Sanchez and Inés Gonzalez in the context of questions and answers. I'll touch on them a little bit at the beginning or before questions, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions you all have about anything I say or Conversos in general or the book that you're having to read. So there should be plenty of time for you all to talk as well. The reason that I wanted to start specifically by talking about difference is because questions of difference are really fundamental to the whole reason I started thinking about conversos in the first place. Uh, I was super interested as a graduate student, and I mean, I'm still really interested now about how people with fundamentally different understandings of the world can coexist. And Jews, Jewish converts to Christianity, Christians, they can all have really different views of the world, how it operates, what your goal should be as you're moving through life, what is our purpose in the world, all of that. Now, today, religion isn't always quite so central in everybody's mind. And for some people, it's super important, and for some people, not so much. But most of us, I think a lot of people in the United States today kind of think, you do your thing and I'll do mine, and it doesn't have to be a big issue exactly. But in the past, certainly in Europe in the past, I would argue that religion and religious difference played a very central role. And it played that role uh, in a different way than the way in which religion operates today. And I'll just kind of point out then that when we think about engaging with difference, the past is also a very different, it's just a very different cultural milieu, right? It's a very different way of uh, being in the world. So, for one thing, uh, in the past, debates about theology were a really big deal. And here's an example from the 1500s in Spain. It doesn't have anything to do with conversos, but it really makes the point. Uh, in the 1500s, uh, there was not a consensus in the Catholic Church about Jesus's mother, the Virgin Mary. There was a question, or it wasn't totally settled, whether Mary was born without sin or not. I don't know what kind of theology requirements there are at BC, but I'm just like laying it out. This is a doctrine called Immaculate Conception. And today, since the mid 1800s, that's been settled in the Catholic Church. But in the 1500s, it was not settled. And the Franciscan friars argued really strongly for Immaculate Conception, and Dominican friars really argued strongly against it. They got into heated public debates about it. In Seville, which is why we're looking at this pretty picture of Seville, in Seville, there were actually riots in the street about the status of the Virgin Mary. Uh, and the people who were rioting in the streets included lay people, but it also included clergy. It included friars, right? That's really kind of hard to picture in the United States in 2025, but it gives you a sense of how deeply meaningful these religious questions were and how much of an impact they had in people's daily lives, right? I'll also say I've found Inquisition records of Franciscans and Dominicans trash talking each other and getting called before the Inquisition about it, right? So this is one way that we can think about where religion played a different role in the past than it does today. Another way uh, has to do with the question of salvation. In the past, Christians spent more time thinking about salvation as a collective quality, right? Today, sometimes you hear people who are religious in a Protestant context talk about Jesus as their personal savior. There's a very individual sense of like, certainly among many Christians, of this is what I need to do for my salvation. But that's a relatively recent idea. In the past, yes, there were individual souls and there was an individual, like an individual salvation. Individuals, like in Dante, right? They would go to heaven or hell or purgatory in the Catholic context. But your community also played a really big role in this, right? And so if your community harbors people who are working against salvation, that complicates everybody's salvation. That's why we're looking at pictures of Ferdinand and Isabel here. They saw themselves having a key role in this question of the collective salvation of their people. You can see they persuaded the Pope to give them the title of the Catholic monarchs. They were super psyched about that. Isabel is the person who today there are some Catholics who are trying to promote her as a saint. But when they were alive in the late 1400s, Fernando was probably the more devout of the two. But certainly both of them saw themselves as having a kind of religious oversight over their community. They also saw themselves as being really involved uh, in a salvation, in a second coming that could come any day. They thought 1500 was going to be a really big year. Uh, they have religious imagery all over uh, churches and other kind of secular buildings that they built. So that is another way, this kind of collective responsibility is another way in which religion worked a little bit differently in the past than it does now. Okay, so then if you think about those kind of differences in religion in the past compared to now, you can see why the issue of conversos is super important in Iberia in the 14, 15, 1600s. And I said Iberia just now because initially Ferdinand has his kingdom along the coast of the Mediterranean. Isabel has her kingdom in the middle of the peninsula of Iberia. Later, they kind of merged together eventually. But it is religiously diverse and it's also politically diverse, right? Okay. And in that context, conversos are an important, a really kind of a really kind of stressful point in their regime. Um, People begin converting from Judaism to Christianity, like Paul in the New Testament. But in Iberia, there's a big wave of conversion that starts in the late 1300s and increases through the 1400s. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And I'm sure you've already read about it. So I won't go on about it unless you want to ask me questions later. Part of this concern, so on the one hand, Jews are converting to Christianity. Yay, theoretically, that's what Christians are hoping for. But then there's this large group of people who are converts or children of converts or grandchildren of converts, but they don't seem super committed to the whole collective project of Christianity. And so that's part of the concern. They don't seem part of that collective mission of salvation. And different converts, sometimes they seem to sign on to some parts of Christianity more than others. They might show up for Mass, but they may not eat pork still in the way that Jews don't eat pork. Initially, it takes a while for people in Iberia to sort through their response to this, right? Is it just a matter of time? Is there something more that's going on? Should people who get called old Christians who aren't descendants of Jewish converts, should they be suspicious? And what exactly is happening here? Uh, in fact, initially, there isn't even a word converso, right? Uh, that term comes later. And so that should give you a sense, if you don't even have a name for it, that there isn't even a sense of like, do they even have a collective identity or not, right? Um, like I can see everyone as tiny little pinpoints on my screen. And so if I'm too fast or too slow or too quiet or too confusing, you're gonna have to like really like do this so I know to stop, okay?
You're
Otherwise I'll
good,
just keep
Gretchen.
talking at you.
You're
Okay,
doing
cool.
great.
You're dear. Okay. So like who are these folks? How do we understand these converts? Are they even a group that we should refer to collectively? Like what's going on? And this image here is one way in which these so-called old Christians start to think about these converts. This is a Muslim image, and remember, Iberia, religiously diverse. This is a Muslim image. Uh, for devout Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem on an animal called a burak, who was made up of several different parts, right? Like wings like an eagle and a face like a person and a lion. So, okay, there are all these different animals who are all put together to make the burak. In Spanish, 25% of all Spanish is Arabic. Uh, in Spanish, al burak is called alboraique, and some Christians call Jewish converts, they say they're like an alboraique. They're pulling together bits of Christianity and bits of Judaism, and they're not anything real, and we can't trust them. That is a huge, and then we can understand, like, you're like, okay, so whatever, right? But that's theologically stressful, right? And that's stressful in terms of collective salvation. Okay. That all is like at a completely religious level. There are other concerns about conversos as well. Some people were politically concerned about conversos because Christians have access to things in Spanish society that Jews and Muslims do not. Christians can have noble status, Jews and Muslims can't. Christians are allowed to own land. Christians are allowed to participate in government. And so maybe these converts have converted just so they can get all these political advantages. And they're really like sneaking into Christianity just to get political access. Some people have economic concerns. Again, they can own property, they can do business with other Christians that they couldn't otherwise. Jews and Muslims are really limited in their economic opportunities. And we know that some families, some Jewish families would have like, they'd have some children convert to Christianity and run the Christian half of the business, and some families, and then other children would stay Jewish and run the Jewish half of the business, right? So there's, in some cases, there was strategic conversion going on. So there are religious concerns about these converts, and there are political concerns, and there are economic concerns. Uh, for a while, when scholars tried to make sense of converts and their descendants, conversos, uh, scholars kind of wanted to pick one reason as being most important or the real reason, right? Some scholars still kind of feel that way. Uh, but when I think about my own life or I think about people I know, like people are just more complicated than that, right? There can be many reasons why someone makes somebody else uncomfortable. And some of them can be legitimate and some of them totally cannot, right? But not everyone's super self-aware about why other people make them uncomfortable. And so it makes sense to me that in the past as well, it is a complicated mix of political, religious, economic, even social concerns, right? Or jealousy, right? But no matter which or all of those reasons bring this tension between conversos and old Christians, or between what get called old and new Christians, whatever the reasons for it, we can ask ourselves, like, well, how does this connect to what was going on, right? What did Conversos actually believe? What did they actually do? And one of the ways that we can think about that, one of the ways I've been trying to think about that, is to look at Inquisition sources. You're going to read a ton of Inquisition sources this semester, which is awesome. And I'll just like a little shout out that Professor Sellers-Garcia has an outstanding reputation for making use of these sources, but they are definitely complicated. Um, what I'm showing you right now is one of the reasons why Inquisition sources are complicated. This is part of an Inquisitor's handbook. And in my head, I thought I would ask people questions, but I think that's going to be complicated while the PowerPoint's running and when it's so hard for me to see you. Um, so like take 10 seconds. You don't have to say anything out loud, right? But like take 10 seconds. What do you notice here?
Gretchen, if you like, I can manage the group. I can ask somebody to contribute a comment. Would that be helpful?
I Beautiful disembodied Sylvia's voice. Sure.
Okay.
Um, what do you guys notice?
Jacob.
Old Spanish is really hard to read because a lot of times they'll switch. So you have like a lot of F's in a place where nowadays you'll have a S.
Mm-hmm.
They also do with D sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just makes it like super hard to read, super hard to translate. So that's just like the first thing.
And you're talking about the print side, right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you hear that, Gretchen?
Yep.
Okay.
I totally could hear that. That's awesome. And also, like, this is the only day I'll be in this class, right? But like, yay that someone spoke up right away. Yay. I wish you were in my class. Um, yes, the spelling looks different and the typing looks different, and that makes it hard to follow for sure. What other things do you notice? Anything else?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't know if this would be as much an observation, but I feel like when you have to look at like texts that are like this old, it's sort of a problem, I think, when you read like older English texts where there's kind of, I don't know if you call it medieval English, but I assume maybe in Spanish, would there be like sort of medieval Spanish that if you sort of learn it contemporarily, it may be like harder to like sort of read and decipher. Is that all?
Yep. Yep, 100%. And like the whole concept that everything should be spelled the same way every single time, like, no, nobody had that idea really. Um, God loves them. So, like, if you are a person who's familiar with Spanish, there's some things where you're like, why does that look like an F and not an S, right? Like, kind of in the middle of the page, testigo, right? Um, But then there are some places like why is to say dice with my super Castilian accent, dice, right? Like they say in Spanish America. Why is it spelled with a Z? Well, because it was pronounced differently in the past, right? So yeah, absolutely. Um, how many of you take such detailed notes in your books? No one has to confess to that or not, right?
I'm not getting any hands. Getting no hands for that
Yeah,
one.
we'll leave it undiscussed, right? But like whoever's using this book is taking notes and they're numbering stuff on the side, right? 21, 22, they're underlining things. This is a book that got used. It's like burned. Like what the heck is, oh, his ink was not mixed right. Like that little bit that looks burned. He made his ink too acidic and it kind of burned through the paper. Um, it's a book that's getting used. It's a book that isn't entirely helpful because they've got to be writing notes in the side, right? Part of what's complicated about the Inquisition and studying the Inquisition and reading inquisitorial documents is that uh, there wasn't Inquisition school. most of the people who were involved in upper level offices had law training. They'd been to law school, but the specifics of inquisitorial law and procedure, they kind of had to learn on the job. And this book probably didn't belong to a person. It probably belonged to an office. Like it stayed in the office, and then as different inquisitors came and went, they all made use of it. So in some of them, you can see like multiple different kinds of handwriting, right? So there isn't complete consistency in how the Inquisition operates, right? And then there's another question about Inquisition sources, which is like, why should we trust them or believe them, right? The answer is we kind of do and we kind of don't, right? There's a long, what's called historiography, which is like the history of history. But the short version kind of goes like this. Some scholars thought Inquisition sources were completely useless because they were all lies. Some people thought Inquisition sources were completely believable. That was like 100 years ago, right? Now we're beginning to realize and think a little bit more about when we can trust Inquisition sources, when we can't, why we can or why we can't, right? Okay. I'm gonna borrow you again, Sylvia.
Yep.
What we're looking at here, these are later, these are from the like 1630 or so, 1632. What do you notice about this handwriting? Like, what is anything you notice here?
Jane?
The image on the right hand side, like it looks like there's stuff like on one side and like stuff on the other side, so it's like written over it, and also like the wording is all like clumped together, so it's like really illegible.
Peter, were you
It
gonna?
is it
Sorry.
is really, it's kind of illegible, yes. And they're writing on two sides of a page and their ink is bleeding through.
There were a
Yeah,
couple more comments.
absolutely.
Should I gather those
Oh,
two?
cool. Yes, please.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I was just gonna point out the fact that it is like really messy, and I was also gonna point out the fact that like it does seem like someone was like writing over it. I didn't really think about the fact that it might be bleeding through the other page, but yeah, just like, very illegible, kind of what was said before.
Okay. Was there another hand over here? Yeah, Min?
I noticed like the words are more readable. Like I can see like the letter E and A, but like compared to the other like writing, it's just like hard to read, or unless it's just big.
Awesome. Awesome. Oh, this is super. You guys are great. What a great class. Yeah, it is illegible. And it is, if you look at the writing on the left and the writing on the right, like the writing on the right is bigger and it's a little, like to me, it looks a little scratchier, right? The writing on the left, still hard to read, but this is someone who spends a lot more time writing. What you can see here is most of the writing on the left was done by a professional notary, someone who professionally took down what was happening in the tribunal. What is written on the right is from someone who was accused. And what's really cool about this is that the person who was accused was a woman. That I'm not super excited about that, but but this is a woman who knew how to read at a time when maybe 30% knew how to read and write, at a time when maybe 30% of women in Spain could do that. Very, very interesting. And that's, I think, why her writing looks kind of big and scratchy. Like it's just hard to write with a quill pen. On the left, we're looking at her signature, and I've put a little arrow there so you can see where she signed her name. Another thing that's super cool about her uh, is like if you are super comfortable with reading 300-year-old handwriting and Spanish and Portuguese, you'll which I'm guessing there aren't a ton of you in the room like that, but if you were, you could see that some of her handwriting is like a mix of Spanish and Portuguese. She has some words in there, like the third line from the bottom, she says, Juana Lopez e mi cuñao. And she writes cuñao in like kind of in Portuguese, her brother-in-law, right? She was an immigrant from Portugal to Spain at a time when basically all Portuguese immigrants were assumed to secretly be practicing Judaism. If you have questions about that, we can talk about it. And that's why she's brought before the Inquisition. So when we're thinking about what makes a source reliable or not, an inquisitorial source, here we have someone who's actually putting their own words on the page. That makes it, she may be lying, or she may, right? She may be kind of stretching the truth, or she may be doing things to defend herself, but it's her voice, it's her words, it's her point of view. When it's the notary who spends a career writing stuff down, that might be believable or not believable in a different way. Sometimes notaries write things down that they don't totally understand, and they just kind of have to guess at what they're hearing. Sometimes notaries are hearing things in one language, like Basque, and they're writing it down in Spanish. So they're translating while they're writing. So these are some of the questions we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at Inquisition documents. Often the notaries will make like a rough copy while the procedure's going on, while the trial's going on, and then they clean it up later. So when I was researching trials in Guadalupe, where Mari Sanchez lived, they also tried friars. They also tried the clergymen who were there. And I had the records of all the testimony. All the friars testified against each other. Yeah. And there was one poor guy who was in this monastery from Poland, and he had to write his testimony in Latin because apparently he didn't speak Spanish, and he had no idea what was going on. Bless his heart. On the back of one of the pages, they had reused paper. And on the back of one of the pages, I had some of the original testimony, and that was the only evidence I ever saw that friars were tortured, right? So when notaries make clean copies, they may take stuff out, right? They may explain things. They may make extra notes, right? Sometimes inquisitors or other officials of the Inquisition will make notes in the margin, right? Oh, we should check up on this person, right? So these are some of the things that you want to think about as you're reading Inquisition sources. What makes them reliable or unreliable, right? Another way that we can think about what makes Inquisition sources reliable or unreliable is compare them to other things, other kinds of records, secular records, other ways of knowing things, other kinds of tribunals, physical evidence, which is what we're looking at here. On the left, okay, I took it in a museum and you can see the reflection of the exit sign. Actually, you can see my reflection, but whatever. On the left is an Inquisition banner. And then on the right, on the object on the right are the shackles, or some inquisitorial shackles. The Inquisitors also collected physical evidence, some of which we're looking at here. The two on the left are a witchcraft charm with some hair and some nails, like not fingernails, but like actual, like I'm making a cupboard nails, right? And then that image in the center that looks like little chips, little like carbonized chips, those are dried blood. which was thought to be especially holy because of whose blood it was. And the gloves are because have to do with the Masons. So we can look at other kinds of evidence, other kinds of records that give us another point of view. With Conversos, there's another issue that's involved in thinking about what's reliable or not, because scholars write about Jewish converts with the knowledge that in 1492, all Jews will be expelled from Spain. And they're also writing with the knowledge of the Holocaust in the 20th century. So some scholars, given what they know about the 20th century, want to see faithful adherence to Judaism in spite of persecution. And that makes them want to believe the things they read in Inquisition records because they want to see that evidence. Other scholars at different times have wanted to challenge the persecutors of Jews. And so they inherently want to doubt Inquisition records because they want to doubt the whole project of Inquisitors, right? So there are a lot of complicated things you need to keep in mind about the sources and also about your own kind of hopes and expectations that you bring to what you read. So when I started researching Guadalupe, and here are some 19th century images of the monastery in Guadalupe and a little map in the corner because I realized not everyone knows where Guadalupe is, a little free map. Um, so when I started researching Guadalupe, I was looking for answers to all of these questions. I wanted to examine a whole lot of trials from one place, so then I could build up a picture of the community. That also gave me the opportunity to look at other records from that community so that I could shed more light on the Inquisition trials. And I wanted to try and see, even in the midst of this really coercive institution, where there was experience of other kinds of interactions. So that was kind of how I ended up getting to talking about these people. To some extent, I felt like I was able to do that, right? When you read several trials, you start to find those moments of plausibility or places where people kind of go off script, or there isn't a script, there isn't a expected right answer. Sometimes we see things like a man who accuses someone else of heresy because the other man overcharged him in his store, right? So then we can learn some other things about what's going on. A woman who gets tried 3 years later in Guadalupe because she said that when the Inquisitors came 3 years previously, she just said whatever and confessed to anything just to get it over with, right? Okay. I found a secular record in Guadalupe that said that in 1500, so 15 years after Mari Sanchez was tried, the Inquisitor General ordered that all descendants of Jewish converts be expelled from Guadalupe because all the people who had been tried and punished and not executed, most of them were sentenced to exile. They'd all kind of come back and they were all living there again, just like they had before. And so in 1500, there was a decree of expulsion, very unusual. And then 4 years after that, the friars gave money to a converso living out of town to help his daughter get married. So these kind of ongoing connections that tell us that what was happening in Inquisition records isn't the whole story. To study Guadalupe was important for thinking about conversos because it not only is an important religious site, it's a shrine site up to the Virgin Mary, but it's also an important place economically, and it's an important place politically too. Ferdinand and Isabella visit here several times. Columbus, when he comes back from the Americas, this is where he brings people from the Caribbean to be baptized, right? It's a significant place kind of in the in the political and economic and religious landscape of Iberia. And as I said, there were friars tried here too. So there were 120 friars who lived there. About 21 of them were censured for Judaizing, and one of them was executed. Uh, so studying this place gave me a sense of the complexity of how conversos lived in a community. It also gave me a sense of the diversity within the converso community too. I don't have any good pictures of Mari Sanchez's trial, but this is a good example of what it looked like. This is another trial from Guadalupe the same year, a man named Manuel Gonzalez, who ran an inn where they kept kosher. That inn was right across the street from the monastery. So what I saw in the records in Guadalupe is we had some folks like Manuel Gonzalez. He runs a kosher kitchen in the main plaza, and he keeps, and you can see it on the right here, he keeps a little prayer book. And you can tell, perhaps you can tell there's different handwriting there. It doesn't all look the same. Apparently when Jews came to town, he would ask them to add prayers that they remembered into his prayer book. So some conversos were very committed to their Judaism. But then, as I saw, as you see in the article about Maria Sanchez and her daughter Inez, there are some folks who aren't that committed to Judaism, or even very committed to their Christianity and pretty hostile to Judaism. I could also see how people responded to the Inquisition or used it for their own ends, right? I knew from other records in the town that people were kept in these large communal rooms, not in individual prison cells. And since I had read as an undergrad Ambivalent Conquest, which you're going to read later this semester, and I'm super excited because I love that book, I knew from Ambivalent Conquests that if witnesses talk to each other, they might change what they say. Spoiler. And I found that in a woman named Catalina Sanchez, who shows up in Mari Sanchez's story, right? I could see as well the ways in which gender plays a really important role for conversos. If you want to secretly maintain Judaism, even though you've been baptized as a Christian, a lot of the things that men could do, lead services, for example, that's not open to you if your Judaism has to be secret. But domestic activity, keeping kosher, celebrating the Sabbath, those are things that happen inside the home. So it means that women are really important for that converso experience. And it's not surprising that women like Mari Sanchez are the ones who get accused of the most egregious kinds of heresy, right? So I was able to see some of those qualities about conversos and then about how they interact with the Inquisition as well. Okay, I want to leave time for you all to have questions, and I've kind of gone on for a good little bit, but I just want to make two last points for you all, right? Okay. So here's the monastery. Basically, right behind my back is where that inn was, where the kosher kitchen was. The first point I want to make for you when you're thinking about the Inquisition is that it is not a thing that existed like like a box out on its own. It's a group of people. Some of them are participating willingly, some of them are participating unwillingly, some of them are competent, some of them have to take notes in their books to figure out how they're running trials, some of them are corrupt, right? It doesn't, and the Inquisition can't exist without witnesses, at least some of whom, like Inez, are apparently willing to participate. That's one piece that I want you to kind of keep in mind. And then in thinking about like Mari Sanchez and her daughter Ines Gonzalez, and kind of shifting to any questions you might have about that, right? Like you can maybe see from that essay some of the things that I've talked about, right? I tried to trace Inez's testimony across several different trials. And that was how I knew that she would say different things about different people. She didn't have like a script that she went through with everyone. It made her testimony seem certainly more thoughtful and potentially more plausible, right? And we could see all the different kinds of motivations that people might have for participating willingly or unwillingly in the Inquisition. We could see, and we could see as well how complicated it was to live a life where you or your parents or grandparents were forced to convert against their wills. One like last thought, and then I'll shut the PowerPoint off. If you look at this church, monastery, friary, and like going to the right is kind of uphill a little bit. There's like this little platform. You can kind of off to the right, you're heading uphill. That's where they had Mari Sanchez's auto de fe, right? Like right where everyone could see.